Greetings, everyone. My name's John Beard. I'm the director of the International Longevity Center at Columbia University in New York, and I'm your moderator for what I think is going to be a really exciting session. We're going to look at two of the key initiatives which are really framing the global agenda to achieve healthy longevity. The first one is the report that came out that was released last year by the National Academy of Medicine, the Global Roadmap for Healthy Longevity. This is an evidence-based report which is really looking to see how we can make the most of the global trend to older populations, not just for each of us as individuals, but also how we can ensure that society profits from the shift to global aging, and how we can do that in an equitable way. The other initiative is the UN Decade of Healthy Aging, which is going to run until 2030. This is led by a team at WHO who we're going to hear from, and it's framed, it's a transformative collaboration of diverse stakeholders who are bringing together work to have a concrete impact at a global level in four key areas, again, which you'll hear about soon. I was lucky enough over the last 10 years to be involved in both of these initiatives. I was a commissioner with the National Academy of Medicine, and I was previously the director of aging as WHO worked up the background towards the Decade of Healthy Aging. But you'll be lucky that you're not going to have to listen to me. You're actually going to have some fantastic speakers who are extremely knowledgeable about these areas. The first is Professor John Lee Wong. He's the Isabel Chan Professor of Medical Sciences and Executive Director at the Center for Population Health at the National University of Singapore. He's also Senior Advisor with the National University Health System, and he was co-chair of the US National Academy of Medicine's Global Roadmap for Healthy Longevity. We will then hear from Alana Officer, who leads the WHO section that drives the UN Decade of Healthy Aging, and Kazuki Yamada, who's a key technical officer in the team working with Alana to achieve that. We're going to structure the session in two components. To start with, we'll have each of the presenters talk for 10 or 12 minutes about each of these two initiatives. And then we'll have a half hour or so of discussion. And if you want to get involved, please use the question and answer button on your screen. You can pose questions. I can't promise we'll be able to get around to all of them, but I will do my best, and I can promise you that we're going to have a terrific and interactive session. So to start off with, I'd like to ask John to tell us a little bit about the Global Roadmap and why it's relevant for the Innovator Summit.
Well, thank you very much, John. And hello, everyone. My name is John Wong, and I was privileged to co-chair the National Academy's first Global Grand Challenge, looking at developing a global roadmap for healthy longevity. The next slide, please. So, one of the incredible successes of the last century has been that we've been able to increase lifespans in nearly every society around the world. Next. But this does raise new issues. Next slide. While we've seen this increase in lifespan, it's also occurred at the same time as a significant drop in global fertility rates, such that for the first time in human history, there are now more people over 65 than under 5 globally. Next slide. What is interesting, and people may not appreciate, is the speed at which this is occurring. So it took France about 115 years to go from an aging society to an aged society. The United States did it in 72 years. Asia, as an average, is going to do it in 23 years. Next slide. And it is this rate of population aging that will fundamentally impact our whole social fabric, family structures and relationships, the social infrastructure itself, insurance and retirement programs, housing, transportation, the built environment, chronic disease, how we deliver healthcare, and very importantly, how we're going to finance it, as well as economies and the whole workforce. Next slide. So when the Global Commission, and there were 19 commissioners from the East and West, North and South, looked at how prepared we are, we came to the conclusion that there was a very mixed level of preparedness. And actually, very few countries are really ready and prepared to meet both the needs and, very importantly, seize the opportunities of longer lives. Some countries score well on some dimensions, but not very few countries score well on all the dimensions. And next slide. So what's really important is that the whole world does need to prepare financially, socially, and scientifically for the longer lifespans that we've been blessed with. It's really become a global imperative because it will affect the way we live, learn, work, and play. Next slide. So the global roadmap was released last year. You can download it for free. And it will certainly complement the UN Decade for Healthy Aging, which you will hear next. Next. So I think it's very important to understand that it's not that long-lived populations are the problem. The problem is that we have barriers that prevent our communities, our societies, to really reach their later years with good health. And we need good health if we're going to do anything, whether we're going to learn, work, play, have strong social networks, we need good health. And societies also are not designed to really seize the opportunities of these longer-lived populations. Certainly, longer-lived populations pose potential generational challenges, and we really need to address issues of social cohesion across generations. Next slide. So the Commission concluded at the end of the duration of the Commission, which lasted almost 3 years, that the evidence does support the potential for health span equaling lifespan. And let me elaborate on this further. Next slide. The Commission defined healthy longevity as the state in which the years in good health approach the biological lifespan, this issue of health span matching lifespan. And it's very important that during this period, we have all elements of good function, physical, cognitive, and social. And this combination of these three dynamic elements, all interlinked, will enable well-being across populations. Next. But it's really important that the foundation for all of this is health for all across the entire life course, well into older age. Next slide. The other important concept to realize is that health is really a complex systems issue. The Commission identified 4 large domains: the domain of the longevity dividend, the benefits of work and also planned retirement, volunteering, lifelong education and retraining, the domain of social infrastructure, addressing, capitalizing on the pro-social strengths of older people, addressing ageism, the need for social inclusion, financial security in retirement, and digital literacy, the whole issue of the physical environment, ranging from housing to transportation, public spaces, and the impact of climate change and digital technologies, and certainly the whole health system, public health, healthcare delivery, long-term care, and taking advantage of the tremendous advances in neuroscience, technology, and big data. Now, if we just look at one aspect, next slide. If we just look at one aspect, say work and retirement, the interrelationship, next slide. Let's go back one. The impact of work and retirement across so many of these domains is both bidirectional and unidirectional. So addressing just one factor will not be sufficient to impact or seize the entire benefits of healthy longevity. We really need to approach this as a complex systems issue. Next slide. So the question is how to begin. And the Global Commission outlined a series of principles, goals, and recommendations. Next. So there are essentially 5 principles. Firstly, that we really need to make sure that people reach their full potential across their entire lifespan with good health, meaning, purpose, function, and dignity. Next. And that societies need to enable this. Next. We need to reduce disparities and enhance equity across all sectors of society. And when we do this, we will then realize the human, financial, and social capital of older people. Next. And the last principle is that we must use data and meaningful metrics to track whether we're actually achieving this. Next. And so there are 8 recommendations. So there are 8 goals, There are 8 goals that we want to strive for. Firstly, the economic and social benefits from people living longer and being able to contribute. We need to design our social infrastructure, businesses, and institutions. We need to look at education and training, social cohesion, social protections and financial security, physical environments and infrastructure. We need to have a health system that's integrated across public health, social services, person-centered healthcare, and long-term care. And we need to have quality long-term care to ensure that people receive the care that they require in the setting that they desire for a life of meaning and dignity. So how do we do this? Next slide. So essentially 9 recommendations. The numbers on the left indicate the chapters in which they came. But really, we need to enable and encourage older adults to remain in the workforce longer. We need to redesign our educational systems as well as invest in the science of learning. We need to tackle ageism. We need to ensure basic financial security for older people. We need to improve financial literacy and have mechanisms for promoting pension contributions and lifelong savings. Next. We need to design communities so that they can be intergenerational and cohesion enabling. We need to increase our investments significantly in public health. We need to address our healthcare systems and shift them from being disease-centric to really focusing on healthy longevity. And the last recommendation is again on long-term care, that we really need to honor people's preferences about where they want their long-term care, because many of them may not want to choose nursing homes. Next. So this is probably the most important diagram that in the roadmap. At the heart of this, we can create a virtuous cycle if we have a strong social compact at the center with equity and social cohesion as core. And if we invest in the enablers, in work, learning, volunteerism, the social infrastructure, the physical environment to be enabling, and to integrated health systems across public health, healthcare delivery, and long-term care. And if we can address the disruptors, of which ageism is a huge disruptor, as well as chronic disease, poverty, the social determinants of health, pollution and climate change, conflict, and inequity, we will then have societies which are robust and individuals in the society, in the community, which can then generate human, financial, and social capital just because people are living so much longer. And this capital is enormous, and this capital can then complete the virtuous cycle. And let me just show some of the capital, at least from the economic, financial perspective. Next slide. It's been estimated by the United Kingdom that adding 1 year of working life would raise GDP by more than 1.5% over 4 years. An excellent paper by David Bloom and colleagues showed that the economic contribution in 2020 in people over the age of 60 in Europe and the USA approximates 7.3% of GDP, even without any formal structure in place. And delaying the onset of age-related chronic disease in the United States, adding to 1 more year of healthy life expectancy in the United States alone is worth $37 trillion, a sum which is just too enormous to comprehend. Next slide. So this is about innovation, and certainly in Singapore, what we're doing is we're looking at how we can innovate, and we are taking one township, population of 100,000. It's already a super-aged community, 80% living in public housing, and we're trying to implement the roadmap, next slide, across the following domains: preventive health and care delivery, purposeful longevity, the built environment, harnessing technology, and very importantly, evaluating how we're doing this. And we're co-designing this. We're co-designing this using Ibasho principles, and I can elaborate on that later, communications and engagement, and harnessing the best of behavioral and implementation science. So this is just one of several innovations occurring across the world, where we do want to see how we can capitalize on the longer lifespans that we've been blessed with. Thank you very much.
And thank you, John. And having been to Queenstown, I can reiterate just what an exciting initiative that is. What I took out of your talk in particular, I think, is this idea that health emerges from a complex system, but also health feeds back into that system in hopefully a virtuous cycle. But sometimes it can be not so virtuous, and we have to make sure that it's the former, not the latter. So now I'll ask Alana and Kazuki to tell us a bit about the very complementary initiative at the UN.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. So we want to use this opportunity really to give you a snapshot of what is the UN Decade of Healthy Aging, and a little bit about how you can contribute to a world where we can all live longer and healthier lives. So here is a short video to kick us off.
When it comes to aging, we can learn a lot from nature. Just like a tree, our physical and social environments impact our lives. As we age, education, health, and social care, as well as supportive communities, become the roots that nourish our health and well-being. Without them, we struggle to thrive. The UN Decade of Healthy Aging aims to add life to years, so that all people can live with meaning and dignity. Together, we can make every year count, not by the numbers, but how we live and grow in between.
Terrific, thanks. So the decade, and I think it's important to understand, it was mandated by the World Health Assembly and by the United Nations General Assembly. So together, these two bodies bring together 194 countries, states and territories, including the US. As John Beard mentioned, the decade's really intended as this incredibly transformative opportunity that brings together sectors, housing, transportation, health and social care, finance, labor, with a diversity of stakeholders, so governments, civil society, academics, researchers, private sector, and different providers. So, and really working together to do what the slide says and really to transform our world to be a better place in which we can all grow older. So as John mentioned, it's synergistic with the global roadmap that John Wong just presented, and contributions and innovations that you make towards the roadmap can also contribute to the work that's happening around the decade. So on the next slide, you're going to see that the decade is really a framework for doing business very differently than we've done in the past. It has 4 action areas, it has 4 enablers, and older people need to be at the center of all of the actions. So I'm just going to run through those 4 different action areas to give you a sense of what they are. So the first one is really about this decade by combating age-based stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. We can improve our economic development, we can harness intergenerational knowledge, and we can create much more equitable, healthier, and happy societies. So a world that suits all ages, not just some. On the next action area, this decade by creating more age-friendly physical and social environments, so that means around our housing, transportation, inclusive urban spaces, responsive health and social care systems, we can enable older people to age safely in a place that's right for them, to continue to develop personally and to continue to grow, to be included and to contribute to their communities while retaining their health and their independence. In the third action area, in this decade, if we really invest by providing integrated care, we can start treating the person and not just their individual diseases, so that we can better manage chronic diseases, we can maintain physical and mental capacities, and we can prevent people's decline in capacity such that they become care dependent. And which resonates very much with what John was saying as well, in the fourth action area around long-term care, this decade, if we can ensure that people get access to long-term care when they need it, we can also make sure that we can all have the care and the support that we need to enable us to live with dignity and respect in later life. Now, I'm going to pass over to Kazuki to hear about the enablers.
Next slide, please. So we've just heard about these 4 areas for action, areas where there are fundamental opportunities to catalyze transformative change to make sure that everyone around the world can live long and healthy lives. But Alana also started us off with a really important phrase, which is that the decade is an opportunity to do this differently. And what's so exciting and kind of energizing about the UN Decade Framework is that it not only outlines the areas for action where we can create transformative change, but it also outlines the essential ways in which we need to change the way we do work that is essential to achieving those changes that we wish to see in ageism and age-fit environments. This will be apparent, for example, in this first enabler, which is outlined by the framework, which is whenever we're working to combat ageism, create age-fit environments, we need to listen to diverse voices and enable the meaningful engagement of stakeholders, especially older peoples. And this is not just, for example, viewing stakeholders as beneficiaries of services. This means integrating the involvement of stakeholders that have a stake in the products and the innovations that you're working on in every process of that development, not just at the beginning or at the end, but throughout all. If we do that, the innovations we're working on have the potential to achieve really substantial impacts. The next enabler on the next slide, for example, building capacity and nurturing leadership to take action across sectors. We just heard from John that health is a complex system and single sectors alone in silos cannot achieve changes. But we also know that other sectors which have an essential role to play in fostering healthy aging and healthy longevity are not necessarily attuned to the critical opportunities that are available if we choose to work towards ensuring that all of us can live long and healthy lives. So if we build the capacity, if we talk to other sectors and involve them in this global collaboration to foster healthy aging, our innovations and our work can achieve much greater impacts than us alone. Next enabler. The third enabler is about connecting stakeholders. And this is connected to the previous enabler in that we can't do things alone. And if we collaborate to work together to foster healthy aging, we can be greater than the sum of our parts. And I want to highlight a few things. This is, for example, thinking about how high-income countries can learn from low and middle-income countries and the innovations that they've been doing in order to foster healthy aging in these regions, or thinking about how other disciplines and other localities and languages hold specific types of knowledge that we can learn from to make our innovations about healthy aging sharper and more impactful and more supportive of the way current and future generations of older people can maximize their longer lives. Next slide, please. And all of these kind of calls to change the way we do business differently is enshrined in the last enabler, which really calls out the strengthening of data research and innovation to accelerate implementation. So this enabler really recognizes that, the whole of the decade without thinking outside the box, and innovation is suffused throughout the action areas and enablers, but also in the way we use data and research. So how are we going to, for example, make sure that the way we conduct and report on the results of research are available to everyone to benefit from? Because together, by working with the same data sets or by benefiting from each other's work in an open source way, we can achieve even sharper innovations that can really achieve impact in healthy aging. So innovations are opportunities for the decade. But what are those specific opportunities? To start us off there, I'm going to pass back to Alana.
Great. So in this decade, we need to change not just what we do, but also how we think about age and aging and how and with whom we work. So we need to start first with changing and thinking about or reflecting on and potentially changing how we think and feel about age and aging. So globally, 1 in 2 people, or half of the world's population, are ageist. So we perceive aging and older people negatively. Now, this influences the questions we ask, it influences the solutions we're going to find. So if we continue to see aging as negative, inevitable decline and disengagement, then really the types and the potential for innovation that we might have are incredibly limited. So not being ageist is a superpower for innovation. There are also personal benefits in not being ageist. So by shifting out your own perceptions of your own aging process, you tend to live longer, you have better physical and mental health, and you have faster recovery from disabilities. So there are many advantages. But as we said, the decade outlines 4 action areas, and there are huge opportunities for innovation within these different areas. We're already seeing, for example, we have a group of the Healthy Aging 50, which was really celebrating people who have been innovating in this space. But the scope for more innovation is really enormous. So, for example, we can have innovations that happen in our policies and our systems, or we have to have innovations in our policies, in our systems, in our services, and in the products that are developed. For example, creating products or services that enable people to live independently in a place that they want, usually in their home within their community. Opportunities for older people to continue to learn and to grow, for example, reducing the digital divide. Developing programs that bring generations together or that keep people socially connected. Helping people manage their health while continuing to work. John raised the issue of the importance of longer working lives, but how health is a major barrier to a longer working life. How do we manage health within a work environment? How do we enable people who do want to continue to work and to stay in work longer? We need innovations and reforms around our pensions, around how flexible work arrangements are managed that allow people to care or take on care responsibilities as they age. We need to develop innovations in our saving products, in our financial management tools that are better suited to the second half of life than maybe the first. And we need to harness new technologies in ways that continue to support us as we age. So there are a multitude of opportunities, many more than those that I've mentioned, that are possible to improve health and well-being as we age. But for how we work and with whom we work, I'm going to pass back to Kazuki.
There's also a massive number of opportunities for innovating in how we work. I just mentioned how for the decade, there's a recognition that it's not just the changes in areas of action that's important, but also in the way we do work. And I just want to run through a few examples from each of these enablers. For example, I mentioned how one enabler is amplifying and listening to the voices of older people and meaningfully engaging them in work. From the perspective of innovation, we often have opportunities, for example, to involve older people, let's say if they're your stakeholders, in the beginning of a project for innovation, to listen to their needs as users, and then involve them at the end of the project, for example, to get the evaluation of how a product or an innovative idea or initiative is working for them. These are quite standard ways of engagement of older people and other stakeholders, but what does it look like if the final stakeholders, the final users, the final beneficiaries, the people who an innovative idea or product will impact the most in a positive way are involved in every aspect of the development process, not just in terms of hearing their needs, not just in terms of evaluating what the final product is, but how can they be involved in the research itself or in the development itself? There are real ways of integrating throughout a process, a way of engaging the stakeholders who have a say and a responsibility to be a part of the innovative work that you're doing. So that's one example. In building capacity, for example, Alana just mentioned that we have a group called Healthy Aging 50, leaders who are showing the way to kind of showcase that achieving the vision of the UN Decade of Healthy Aging and embodying its values is already possible. So innovative ways of training in building capacity, building up leadership by showing existing examples or thinking about new ways of kind of training, especially through technologically developed interventions where you can build the capacity of others to a wider audience than you could have ever before through the use of technologies we have now, such as VR and AI and other technologies. So thinking about ways to really expand the understanding of people, to think about aging as an opportunity and not as a challenge. And in terms of data, I already mentioned a few things like open sourcing data, but also in the way we collect data. We really have a lot more to go in terms of making sure that the data we collect and make available as a part of our projects and innovation are age disaggregated. And there are methodological innovations in terms of collection and availability that can be made in ways that really have a vast impact, because we often hear that what gets counted gets done, and what gets measured gets done. So there are innovations in the way we handle and collect data that can be done to achieve changes in the areas of action we want to see. And finally, in connecting stakeholders, there are vast examples of the potential of social media, for example, or other methodologies of connecting different people with each other and expose them to different ways of thinking that could really change the way we think about things and innovate to achieve new ideas and new products that we would not have been able to do before if we remain within our usual bubbles and communities. So there are vast opportunities in how we work and with whom we work. So connecting stakeholders is about, not just working with fellow researchers and academics or within your sectors, but also recognizing the role that governments, civil society, older people themselves, and other sectors that you may not usually think of when doing innovation that could really benefit to making your innovative ideas and projects much more impactful and much more relevant to the people who would benefit from them than working alone in a single sector.
If we go to the next slide, just to finish off, the decade is really for everyone. It's intended for both current and future generations. And again, by working together, we really can make every year count, not by the numbers, but by how we live and grow in between. Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Alana, and thank you, Kazuki. And I mean, obviously, it's an incredibly ambitious agenda. I really like the idea of older people being at the center and listening to the voices of older people, and perhaps for the audience we're talking about today, this idea of co-design, because we're in an Innovator Summit, and I'd like now to sort of start thinking about some concrete ways which we can help innovators think about their work. And I think I'll come back to some of the stereotypes you touched on, Alana, because I think they're important that we break through those stereotypes if we're really going to come up with some innovative thinking. But first of all, John, I'd like to go back to you, and particularly to hear a little bit more about the Queenstown initiative and some of the concrete things which you're putting in place which might give people an idea for the innovation that's occurring in that setting.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think that the Queenstown project is now coming up to 2 years old. I think one of our first steps was to try and really approach this from a whole of society perspective. So we reached out, so it's co-led by the National University of Singapore, the National University Health System, and the Housing and Development Board. The Housing and Development Board is a unique Singapore institution. It houses 80% of the resident population. So 80% of Singaporeans and permanent residents live in public housing. And that's provided. So the Housing and Development Board, they build townships. So they were a key partner in bringing the whole of the National University of Singapore, all the disciplines, all the faculties, and then an academic health system ranging from primary care to tertiary and community care. I think getting that and then reaching out to multiple government agencies, the Ministries of Health, National Development, Trade and Industry, Social and Family Development, Culture, Community and Youth, Education, and then the social sectors. So working across the social sectors and really trying to get everyone together, saying, because health is a complex system, it's very difficult to boil an ocean. It's much easier to boil a teacup. So we decided, if we're really going to try and implement the UN Decade or the National Academy of Medicine Global Roadmap, we needed something we can really put our arms around with. And that's why we chose a township of 100,000. It's reflective of what Singapore is going to look like very, very soon. In 2026, the whole of Singapore is going to be super aged. And 80% live in public housing in Queenstown. So it's got the socioeconomic profile. We found out very early, we decided that we wanted, as I mentioned, to focus on preventive health and care delivery, purposeful longevity, shaping the built environment, harnessing technology, and then evaluating whether we're on the right track. But we found three very important hygiene factors. So the first one, you're absolutely right, is this issue of co-design. To make something really sustainable, everyone must believe that they own it and they shape it. And no one is more critical than the residents themselves. So really having the residents involved in co-creation of these programs. And I mentioned the Basho principles. This is led by Professor Emi Kyoda. Professor Kyoda comes from Japan, lived in the United States, now moved and joined the National University of Singapore. And looking at older people as assets to the community, that's fundamental. And then going about saying the 8 principles. Older people have wisdom. We need places where people can gather normally, so they should feel at home. There's no such thing as being on the margin. Okay, you want everyone involved. It must be owned by the community. It must be multi-generational. It must be culturally appropriate. It has to be resilient and sustainable. And there's no such thing as perfect. So you embrace imperfection. And with that in mind, we actually have residents now actively engaged, because the residents before were very passive. They would basically take government policies, do what the healthcare system did, do what the healthcare system told them to do, but really didn't get engaged in this process. Communications and engagement is really critical to really be able to win over hearts and minds. And then the whole science of implementation. There's the whole science behind implementation science, which we're discovering, rapid prototyping, making sure that you've got all the stakeholders together, and then learning to fail fast and then learn and develop. So with all of this in place, we're able to actually start programs where we're embedding blended health and social care teams within public housing. We're starting hubs, which are essentially run by the residents, to look at programs that they want. And one of the first things that they want to understand is digital literacy and how to avoid being scammed. We're looking at how we can get people back into the workforce at an older age. We're looking how to shape the built environment to address issues of climate change, to address issues of walkability, and to address the built environment to create employment opportunities within walking distance so you don't have to commute. And then finally, the technology. What kind of technology that the user interface is so seamless that people really don't regard it as an interface, which is trusted, which is scalable, and which is sustainable. And so we're looking at passive sensors, so you don't have to wear wearables. We're looking at how to protect confidentiality, how to keep people functional. I think that was really mentioned by Alana and Kazuki. That's a critical element in what we're trying to do.
So, John, you touched on this issue that this is a very complex system, but somehow we want to know if we're making a difference. How do you evaluate the success of such a complex initiative like this? And I ask that because it strikes me that a lot of innovation is really searching for magic bullets, but really we want to have an impact on the whole system. And there's this tension between seeing that the magic bullet or that component might work, but also how do we know if it's really changing the world? Have you looked at that?
Absolutely. So there was a great paper that came out in 2018 at the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. First author, by coincidence, happened to be a faculty member from Singapore, Cynthia Chen, but it was largely the MacArthur Network, which looked at five key domains of successful 21st centuries. So well-being, productivity and engagement, security, not only physical, but financial, cohesion, and equity. So these 5 big domains, and what we've done is we've taken those 5 big domains and we've broken them down into subdomains, And we've come up with 37 indicators to assess whether residents are meaningfully employed, their level of education, community participation, their health across both physical, mental, and social, looking at issues of social capital, looking at health behaviors. And we've just embarked on a multi-million-dollar baseline study of the township with a control district. And then in 3 years' time, we will repeat the evaluation and see whether we're shifting the needle.
Excellent. Now, Alana, one of the things that strikes me about both these initiatives that I really like is that rather than thinking about health through the lens of whether people have disease or not, there's a very heavy emphasis on functioning. And I think looking at health through the lens of functioning is really quite transformative and hopefully would also foster significant innovation. I'm wondering if you've thought at all about that and how that might tie in with the sorts of initiatives you're proposing.
Yes. So I think also you've also done a lot of work in this area. So it's, I mean, I think it's a common area and interest. Clearly, you know, treating people as if they're buckets of diseases is both costly and inefficient, and doesn't really enable us to get a comprehensive picture of the individual in terms of their levels of functioning and as well as their diseases, because they still need to be managed, and also what's important to people, so what they value. And so a lot of the work around the decade is really intended to do two things. It's intended to improve everything from our skin in, yeah? So address diseases, improve cognitive, mental, physical functioning, and social functioning, anything that is associated with our body functions. But beyond that, it's also about what can we do within our broader environment, our physical and our social environment, that can enable us to function beyond what we would be able to do if it's just ourselves. I mean, the classic example is you're wearing glasses, your intrinsic capacity or what you can do is very different whether you are wearing or not wearing your glasses. So the work around the decade is really intended in recognizing that we live and exist within broader environments, within these broader systems. So there are individual level interventions that we can do, and then there are broader environmental ones. Some of those broader environmental initiatives impact directly on the choices we have, on the opportunities we have, and on our own ability to foster or to experience better physical and mental health. But also there is so many opportunities, as I think both John mentioned and me, around the different interventions in transport and housing, and other sectors that can enable us to really function at much higher levels, you know, have higher health or better health, and also function more as a result of those. So we're really looking within the decade at how we can, you know, address those two areas.
Okay. And if we come back to how we think, feel, and act about aging and older people, and what older people could do, those things that they're functioning that you're talking about, how do you think we've been impeded in the past by outdated stereotypes, and what do we need to do to be able to think about the innovations which might help us move to an exciting new future?
I mean, surprisingly, and it's quite universal in terms of our attitudes, we tend to be quite negative about getting older. Yeah, we think of it as an inevitable decline, and it's a time of disengagement, and we can't contribute. So there are those sort of general stereotypes around, you know, the inabilities of older people to continue to learn and grow and even innovate themselves, you know, which are just false. So there's a lot of misconceptions around the process of aging, the experience of aging, and the potential of older people within society. So I think that if we're not addressing those issues and having a more realistic understanding of age and aging, then it is very difficult for us to innovate in ways that maximize the potential, I think, of what we can do.
Actually, and it's really interesting how older people internalize some of those societal expectations. Before I took up this job at Columbia, I found myself asking myself, do I really want to do this at my age? And I would never have, there's no reason to think that, apart from the way that I've absorbed the expectations of what people do at different stages of life.
And I think that that's a key point, because it's the environment in which we live. It's the perception of other people and their perception of ourselves as we age, and that we embody, in fact, as we get older. But we also know that we can address ageism. Policies have a huge impact on challenging discrimination on the basis of age. Intergenerational contact, if it's done well, so if there is a joint purpose, if different generations are on an equal footing, it can make a huge impact in challenging perceptions of both older and younger people. But also education. So education, along with intergenerational and policies, can really help us tackle ageism and shift the way that we think and feel about age and aging.
And it's interesting because I think there is also a tension, as we talked about earlier. I think we all agree that, listening to the voice of older people is really important. But as Henry Ford said before he developed the Model T, if I'd asked them what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. So when we talk about co-design, I think there's this balance between listening, but also pushing people to think a bit beyond what they were already thinking about, to understanding that the future might be different. And so I think for innovators, it's important to walk people through that process of moving from the present to thinking about the future. Yeah. So look, we're gonna have to wrap up. We've got a couple of minutes more. Do you guys want to have a last word from the decade perspective?
I mean, I think one of the points that we maybe haven't confronted enough is this issue of equity, and the fact that in the process of innovation, it's really important to reach those that are unreached but can potentially benefit from those interventions. So one of the opportunities there is through co-research, so training people or having other people who are in contact with older people. I think the issue of equity, and to make sure that you're not speaking to the same people, even if it's the same older people, all the time about everything you're doing, but making sure that you're getting a broad spectrum of perspectives in the innovation work that you're doing.
I'm so glad you brought it up. It was on the bottom of my list, and as usual, it was left till last, and I was going to leave it off. So equity, absolutely critical. John, before we go, have any of the discussions I've been having with Alana and Kazuki, do they resonate in Asia? Do you think Asia is different from elsewhere?
Well, I think the major difference in Asia is that everything is happening 3 times faster than the United States and 5 times faster than Europe. So Asia has this incredible challenge of going from young to super age societies essentially within one lifetime. I think really, people comprehending not only the challenge, but the opportunities. And I think that's what we've been really working on, and using both the decade and now the National Academy of Medicine roadmap to show the evidence that we can unlock an untapped human, social, and economic capital that humanity has never seen before. The potential of age-diverse societies. So instead of just a pyramid, with largely younger people and a small number of older people at the top, but a rectangle where you've got younger people and older people, each with qualities that either generation doesn't have, and that these qualities together are synergistic and complementary. And actually showing the evidence and showing role models, that's extremely powerful. And I think that's something which we really do need to share. And I sort of liken this to when women entered the workforce after the Second World War. Economies boomed, and no one would ever think of not having half of humanity in the workforce. And now we have got a huge population it's the only natural resource that's increasing besides carbon is our older people. But this, unlike carbon, this is an opportunity which we can really societies can really seize upon.
Thank you, and I think that's a terrific point to leave things on. Perhaps in Asia also, because the pace of change is so rapid, maybe it's even more hard to understand that the present is not the future. For it's if people have shifted here in just 10, 20 years, it's very hard to imagine that the future can be as different again in such a short compressed period. And I think for the innovators who are listening, this idea of trying to work with older people to help them and yourselves imagine what that future could be would be a really powerful tool for coming up with some initiatives to tackle this incredible opportunity. So I think I'm coming to the end of our time, but I'm not getting any messages from the team.
John?
Yeah, in which case you can say something, John.
Well, I just want to say that for Asia, I think one of Asia's saving graces is the incredible amount of investment in education. So we're seeing every cohort actually even more educated than previous cohorts. And I think that the future old have got an incredible potential because they're just, and the fact that we're taking a life course approach, investing in everything from antenatal health, early childhood, adolescence, young adults, and older age. And this life course approach coupled with investments in education, I think, and the benefits of science certainly are enormous. It's an incredible opportunity for the future. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you to our speakers. Innovators, you've heard about 2 fantastic initiatives, and you've also heard about some concrete examples, particularly in Singapore, about how they can be applied to your thinking. Go with it and multiply.
All over the world, in Africa, in the Middle East as well. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Bye.